Hello and welcome to our latest panel at the Future of TV Global. Today, I'm joined by three illustrious strategists and planning directors from some of the top London agencies. We have David Granger, who's Chief Strategy Officer at Visium. We have Victoria Bickle, who is Managing Partner at Universal McCann. And we have Emma Witherington, can't remember if I got that right. Did I get that right?
Witherington, yeah.
Who is Executive Director of Planning, or what used to be known as Head of Planning at Manning Gottlieb OMD, part of the Omnicom Media Group. So three very experienced planners who are trusted with millions of pounds of their clients' money and try and spend it in strategic ways to outthink their competition. So the theme of this panel is: are we going to enter into a post-COVID recession? So is the COVID timeline going to mean that the advertising industry, which has obviously been affected hugely during lockdown with spends going on, are those spends going to come back in a V shape, in a U shape? Are they not going to come back at all? And how will we start to see client monies being spent? So let's start with you, first, Vic, on that. I mean, do you think that there is going to be a recession, and what that recession might look like in advertising terms compared to what we've had previously?
Well, it's actually quite timely, this conversation and this question, because actually in the last 2 weeks I've sat through a series of presentations myself where this has been explored with my clients. And actually, I heard something said last week that 2008 was the dry run for what we're about to see and experience. And there's a stat to say that $8.8 trillion has been wiped off the global economy, which is 9% of the economic output. So I think we're in for quite a big roller coaster ride ahead, and actually it's been much more compared to, without being too negative, the Great Depression of the 30s.
Too negative at all.
I'm sorry, but we have to face realities, and there's lots of great men and women in advertising that are actually quoting at the moment that this isn't 2008 or 91 or the dot-com bubble. I think Martin Sorrell said this is wartime, and it's because it's not a demand issue like previous recessions. This is actually a supply and demand issue, and it's something that I've been personally feeling so much with my clients over the last 100+ days. I think previously we went into a fight or flight mentality of stockpile issues, pause activity to brands that aren't doing well. Do we stop or do we continue? And it's much more about how we plan into H2 with this factor in our minds, and how we actually, do we continue pushing the brand pieces? Do we pause them? Or how much do we balance between short term and long term? So, it's the big conversation at the moment. All I would say about H2 is it's not necessarily like we would do in the old days, which was lay down media and have it locked away right now and off we go and start planning 21. This is a period in probably media history where we're going to be more agile than ever.
Okay, and David, again, what are your plans looking like? Are they coming back slowly, or are they non-existent still at this stage?
I think we're lucky that we have clients who have had a need to advertise over the last sort of couple of months, and we are beginning to see other clients come back to the market, like alcohol clients is the best example. And there's a lovely campaign kicking off from Stella right across Europe just this week. But I think it's right. I think the next 2 quarters are going to be very, very difficult to predict. I think hardest of all is sort of predicting the mood in the sort of run up to Christmas. If you're working with a sort of grocery brand right now, it must be impossible to sort of understand what that sort of mood is going to be. Emotionally, Christmas is always a blowout, but you don't want to put advertising into market which appears sort of too decadent. So I imagine a lot of retailers are rethinking not just where they advertise, but how they advertise and the types of things they say as well. And that makes forward planning very difficult.
Emma, you've got a couple of big retail clients, haven't you? How's that work?
We do. Yeah, it's really difficult. We are in the throes currently of trying to plan John Lewis for Christmas, which obviously is a big moment. And it's fair to say that it is a very different kind of planning that we're looking at. I agree that you can't ignore the fact that people, so many people have been through such different personal journeys, and the way that we plan audiences, even though it's moved on enormously in the last few years to look at much more behavioural traits rather than just demographic, how can we group people by what they've been through? You just can't, and therefore I think that's something that's really going to impact our planning, trying to understand, how Corona and how this whole crisis has kind of really impacted people first and foremost, and therefore what role is it that a brand needs to play to adapt to that, what's appropriate. To Dave's point about you don't want to be lavish and sort of dramatic, but equally some people might want their mood lifting, and it's still a joyous festive time. So we're trying to navigate it with as much data as we've got, but obviously we can't predict that how that's going to land and how the market's going to react to it.
Okay, and the spend your way out of a recession challenge we've all practiced over the last 3 decades and 4 recessions or whatever. Yeah, is that less relevant now because the way that we've entered into recession has been a pandemic rather than an economic crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just not the same. There's a lot written about it. First and foremost, it's a public health crisis. It's not a recession. It hasn't affected anyone in the same way. I think that's the fundamental difference. You've got people and advertisers and companies that have been okay, and that, dare I say it, have done well because they serve a particular need that's been really relevant for people at this time. And you've got others that are obviously having a really difficult time. And I think it's that imbalance that makes it quite fundamentally different, and sort of the planning as a result and the advertising result is obviously needs to be tailored to that.
Yeah, okay. And Vic, again, what's the planning cycle for 20? Have you got clients already looking at 2021, or are you worrying about next week rather than next year?
A little bit of both, to be honest. Planning is definitely in full swing, but I will say actually that the mindset of how we plan, like I mentioned before about being agile, has changed, but actually it's not necessarily on the back of what we're going through now. It's just about the fact that we're now investing much more in lots of tools and technology that's allowing us to think differently about planning, and just in terms of the way marketeers are starting to think about how they spend their budgets, and in that kind of more agile, dynamic, consumer-led way. So from our perspective, actually, we plan across 25, sometimes more brands, and in the past we've done an annual planning cycle that can take up to 6 months, and the output for every brand is exactly the same, dependent on how much the focus of the business is, how much they're going to drive business versus budget spends. This year we were actually looking at it very differently, and actually we started the process in January, and it feels really fit for purpose where we are right now, which is looking at those brands that really need that acceleration and that kind of more richer strategic thinking, having a bit of a relook at audiences, creative assets, messaging and things like that. Well, what's fundamentally different is probably only 4 brands sit into that, and the remainder of the brands, our brand leads have actually asked for much more quarterly planning, so making sure that we're optimizing and we're always on, and we're not actually laying down the money in November and then walking away from it and then doing the odd reports that might tweak a little bit here and there. It's much more about always on planning. So I think actually, even though that process started quite early, it feels right now for where we're moving in the next kind of 18 months beyond. Don't know how long it's going to go on for. But yeah, I think having that kind of look ahead is really important, as well as thinking about that short-term piece as well, and making sure that we've got the balance of both. And I think also it's thinking about how holistically we can think about this e-commerce piece. I read that what's happened in the last 100 days was forecast to happen over 4 to 6 years. So it's now you've got another huge growing channel, not that it wasn't in the first place, but it's now a bit more of a monster than it was at the beginning of this year, that we need to consider as part of that piece, which again means, really lends itself to that agility.
Yeah, obviously Amazon are our clients. I'm sure you can't say anything nasty about them, but I get it. For someone like J&J, is now Amazon and e-commerce becoming a channel that will benefit from the situation we're in versus a traditional. I mean, you've used the phrase "always on," which of course has been associated more with performance marketing and online channels rather than television or radio or print. Yeah. Are you now planning e-commerce as a separate channel? Is that?
No, and actually, the e-commerce space from J&J perspective has been a huge driving forward in probably the last 3 to 4 years. It's just accelerated very quickly, pretty much overnight, and actually it lends itself its own challenges with, I mentioned earlier, the stockpiling issues. You're reliant on a third party to let you know how your stock supply is doing. So sometimes you have to be a bit more closer to that project management of your individual campaigns and making sure that you've got that capability and that specialism within the team to be able to ensure it's being paced correctly, it's being managed correctly. If stock issues are occurring, that you're making those alarm calls earlier on before it's too late. So actually, e-commerce comes with its own challenges. But I will say that e-commerce historically has been the bolt-on. It's been the and this at the end of every plan, and now it's much more leading the conversation than ever before, and I think that's been the huge game changer in the last quarter, and I think that's going to continue. We've already thought about that as part of our planning piece, as part of a planning wheel, so that it fits in all components of the journey.
Doing a lot of nodding there. Would you agree with
all? Yeah, I think it's fascinating that now media agencies have to be responsible for sort of stock management. That's a sort of brand new skill. This is something which we didn't have to worry about, and as Victoria alluded to, the sort of the acceleration in sort of e-commerce over the last 100 days has meant that we've had to be far closer to sort of key clients to understand just what we can advertise and whether we can sort of advertise certain products at all right now.
Okay, and Emma, let's bring you in on this one again. Always, I once nearly launched a media agency called Always On about. I wish I could have sold the name rather than the agency, but so Always does that mean performance marketing in your eyes?
No, it doesn't. I think I completely agree. Like it just means that we're having to really think about what interactions we're having with people all the time, because they are constantly looking for, listening out for, watching, everything, and you don't know when that moment is that you're going to be able to make that sale or sell that service or have that interaction. And I think that as long as you are thinking about all of those channels, then that's the only way we can do it. There are moments when you need different channels to do different things, but I don't think that Always On is the playground for performance marketing at all. I think things are changing so quickly as well that you never know when your brand's going to suddenly become really relevant, and I think having a plan for that is as important as well as part of an Always On playbook, essentially, of activity.
Well, so I'm sure you've had clients who've looked to significantly reduce brand advertising already. I mean, can they, again, without they want to, but without mentioning any clients specifically? I mean, as a more generic question, can brands afford to reduce advertising for even a single year?
I mean, I don't think so. I think it depends how you classify, brand advertising. I think what we like to talk about is, really the sort of tactics around brand and performance are different, but your performance activities should be able to build your brand in the same way that your brand activity should be able to encourage an action and or an activation type activity. So no, I think even those brands that have reduced their advertising spend, they've done other things to build their brand, whether that's more purposeful activity, things that aren't necessarily making them profit but are helping keep them front of mind or keep them aware in consumers' minds, so that when they can then start spending again. So I think it's difficult. Ideally they shouldn't stop spending, or at least being active. Being active doesn't necessarily mean spending loads of money. There's lots of ways we can do that at a much sort of cheaper cost now. But I think certainly going quiet is a risky strategy, I would say, rather than spending necessarily.
Vic, I saw now you obviously run a portfolio of brands to J&J. I mean, there again is the view to, even if total advertising is spend, are they looking at a power brand strategy, or is it that going quiet? Do you have brand managers who are afraid of that quiet time?
No, I think it does feel slightly business as usual, but with a bit of an emphasis on building that brand. Actually, brand purpose is a bit the buzzword at the moment, and I ran a session last week with Contagious, and they talked about the thousands of case studies in the last recession that has proven to be the fact that brands in previous recessions have done well in the long term out of it, like the likes of P&G, and I think Nissan was another one that was quoted, and the likes of Mark Ritson, about the fact that the most gangster move you can make in a recession is the fact that you maintain your budget or increase it, and there's lots of evidence on that. The one thing I will say is that within the portfolio brands that we look after, it's kind of a push and pull lever tactic. So you've got to kind of have an image or a bird's eye view of all the brands and all the activities that's going on, and think about which ones the more consumer centric brands are. I think consumer and planning around the consumer is fundamentally important right now against need states. This is quite comical, but digestive brands at the moment are not doing so well because consumers are not in restaurants and they're not got the stresses of the work and the commute. But insight I found out last week is that people are actually in their homes, so they feel more comfortable and dealing naturally with digestive issues. So there's things like that we need to be thinking about from a consumer perspective, about how they're using our brands, and then using some of that insight to be able to push out your messages. So there's certain brands that's going to have a big investment in brand purpose this year, and others will kind of do that much more performance-led activity.
We're pleased. I had my first takeaway curry and my first Gaviscon in last Friday. Late night curry followed by heartburn. I'll be back. David, as you know, it's been a while since I was a planning director in an agency. I mean, what are the conversations that you're leading on at the moment? What's dominating the conversations and what are the big decisions you're asking your clients to take?
Well, I think what's interesting is that there has been there's been a definite swing back to brand advertising in the last sort of 2 years. So all the conversations that we're having are sort of based around all the brilliant evidence that comes out of the IPA, and trying to rebalance that perhaps imbalance that has occurred between sort of brand and performance advertising. And this is a really interesting moment in time to see if that is temporarily reversed it back in favor of performance marketing. I think what's interesting, we talked 15 minutes ago about how this recession is is driven by both demand and supply, and equally that applies to sort of the creative industries as well. You can't actually it'd be very hard to sort of produce a sort of hundreds of thousands TV commercial in the sort of current climate, and a lot of clients are also pausing brand advertising as much because they can't make the ad that they want to make as much as anything else. And I think in the absence of not being able to do that, or perhaps financially postponing those investment decisions until sort of Q1 next year, then performance marketing channels really have to sort of step up, and they have to be far more creative than they've ever been before. Unfortunately, as you well know, we don't hold digital channels to the same creative standards as we hold our sort of TV work, even some of the fantastic radio ads that have been running over the last few weeks. And we need to do that because there's a lot of heavy lifting that performance channels have to sort of perform in the next sort of 6 months.
Again, I've been very disappointed actually. But again, if I see another TV ad with a Zoom call, I think they are picking Santander. I mean, that terrible Ant and Dec thing where they're together a mother and a daughter on a Zoom call, which presumably they're doing every day anyway. Yeah, I mean, are there really good examples that you've seen in the video creativity? Emma, have you seen what have you seen that stood out? Any new commercials that? I mean, I think the outdoor industry has done a brilliant job PRing with no revenue. I agree. With radio actually, have made some really good, audio ads. But I can't remember a good lockdown TV ad.
Who wants to answer? I think we have to sort of give the creative agencies a bit of grace on this one because they physically haven't been able to make they haven't been able to sort of get in studios. They haven't been able to have their teams working in any cinematography that you want to, any sort of original content that you want to sort of produce has there's been sort of just severe physical limitations on their ability to sort of produce stuff. And I completely agree. Everyone's getting a bit tired of sort of handheld camera work right now. But I think we'll see a change in the next sort of couple of quarters as those services return to normal.
Yeah, I think yeah, I was going to say actually, I came across something last week through one of the presentations I've been in, which is an external presentation, but it's we've been doing a lot at about learning from China and how they've kind of come out, because obviously one of the first markets, and how they've actually come out the other side, but there's a great BMW ad that's been made, and that's very different to what you would expect from BMW. That's all about the performance of the drive and the characteristics of the car, and it was actually really emotionally compelling ad, which was all about a look back at the story of 2020. So I recommend to Google the BBC ad, the BMW ad in China, and that's a very good. And I think we'll probably see a lot of brand ads start to do that as we start to come out, that glimmer of hope, and again, that's very consumer centric. That's about what's in it for the consumer, not what's in it for the brand.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I dropped off there for a second, but I think one of the things I think has been really interesting particularly about some of the creatives that we've seen, is how they have really had to think about the context that they're in, because it's everywhere around us, and I think some of the those clever moments of media and message really coming together have been quite interesting, particularly on TV. I think people were just recognizing the world around us more than ever before, and I think I hope that kind of activity change. You've seen it in out of home, and a lot of the out of home work that's been around for the last few months has been extremely topical. Coming from where we buy all of the government work, obviously all of that has to be very relevant and very contextually based. But equally, other brands that are just having a bit of fun, dare I say it, with what's happening and what's on the streets and what we're watching. And I think I hope that reference to context stays, because I think there's some really clever things that can be done.
Yeah. Again, let's talk about your government work. Again, that's obviously been something which has helped the advertising industry no end. The government spend, during lockdown. Has that been planned in Tess Alps will kill me if I say traditional, but it does seem that the government has tended to spend money with, obviously it's spent money with the more established, shall we say, media owners.
It's interesting, because I think it has been planned the pace at which it's been planned, for one, has been phenomenal. The way that the teams have worked so collaboratively with many of the media owners to get things off the ground at breakneck speed has been quite a sight to behold. I think what's really interesting is the brief is effectively, how do you talk to everybody in the most efficient and effective way, which is really tough. And there's been some I guess the perception might be that it's very traditional and broad, but there's been some very, very clever new innovations within that campaign. So that I know there's been a lot of work with TikTok, for example, that obviously has been a bit of a breakout channel and breakout platform during the last few months. But, you know, they've been trialing things because they know in order to get to certain people, that's where you have to be. And equally, there's been a lot of work that they've done with particular communities that potentially, you know, might not normally lean into big broadcast communications. So I think that it's both broad, but also very, very niche in its targeting. And I think that, you know, we're all sort of seeing it, which is great, but I think we're seeing it in the places that we're accustomed to and that we're interacting with. But it's quite a feat to behold when you see some of those Excel plans.
Yeah, I mean, putting your European hat on, okay, have you seen stuff in other markets where, again, obviously, we tend to look at country boundaries because statistics, especially with COVID, have come out within governments, but are there, you know, there's some that have been less affected, some that have come out of lockdown quicker than the UK. Have you seen any planning or anything, any glimmers of light, like your BMW example, where either individual country governments or individual media markets have shown a ray of light for us to look at?
Oh, sorry, who was that director?
Oh, sorry. From a European perspective, well, my remit is more the Nordic markets. Right. So there's some
differences there, aren't there? There's some Nordic had a very good COVID, others less so.
Yeah, and actually they didn't necessarily go into the full mentality of lockdown, a lot of those markets. So we haven't really seen that huge kind of difference between the UK and the Scandinavian markets. But, you know, similarly to one of the things that we are seeing that are very comparable to the UK is just in terms of the way the markets and the pricing and the media owners are operating in terms of that flexibility, that agility. But generally, we will lead on the strategy anyway for those guys to adapt and evolve into their local markets. So I think we're probably at in a very similar place right now as to the Nordic markets.
Right. David, you talked about you've got a number of drinks clients. Again, have they? I've got a friend who works in the wine trade. He's had a good COVID because he delivers to the off trade. Yeah, you presumably your clients are a bit of both.
Yeah, we work quite closely with sort of AB InBev, and I think your question highlights the difficulty, and it's probably the difficulty between this and it will be a recession and the sort of last recession. What's really interesting about sort of 2008 is that the impact of the financial crisis in 2008 didn't hit consumers' pockets until well into sort of 2009, and it allowed and equally that it was similar right across Europe because it was effectively a recession driven by the contraction of sort of credit and available finance. So the average man in the street didn't feel the impact of a Lehman Brothers collapse until sort of 6-9 months later, where it began to impact his own sort of ability to sort of spend money. And as a consequence, it was far easier to sort of plan campaigns across markets because every single European market was following a sort of similar pattern. This time round, you've had an immediate sort of contraction of demand. And that demand hasn't been equal across income strata as we sort of alluded to earlier. So it makes sort of planning cross country campaigns incredibly difficult right now.
And let's talk about sector. I guess drinks is one. Automotive, like that BMW example, I will check it out. I mean, automotive could be one of those sectors who really struggles to come out of COVID time. And have anyone got automotive clients and talk about because they traditionally have been very good advertisers and high spending advertisers, but obviously if you're not selling cars, then again they've got the same cost pressures as everyone else. Anyone got a view on automotive?
Sorry, go on.
Go on, Emma. Go.
I was going to say we've worked with a few. We've got Renault and Nissan and Mitsubishi in the group. And I think the Mitsubishi examples have been really interesting because they've really had to pivot everything from, you know, they normally every ad at some point would have, you know, a promotional offer, you know, wrap up. They would always push a price or at least a test drive. But obviously that hasn't been possible. So they've had to flip and think about, you know, really pushing the online what's it called, the configurator, you know, as their kind of really call to action. They've talked about how, you know, I was chatting to the sort of the marketing director, and she said, you know, everything that we sort of all the tried and tested stuff, automotive is obviously, you know, they know what they're doing. They're well-oiled engines, excuse the pun, in terms of their marketing activities. But that's all kind of been off the cards. You know, they haven't been able to use those mechanics. So everything has had so much more scrutiny than they've ever had before. And, you know, gearing up to when they are able to, obviously now they can open dealerships, but you know, there's the physical limitations of how you might buy a car, but also the financial ones as well. So they're having to really pivot. I mean, Mitsubishi have just become sponsors of the Lunar Drive-In Cinemas, which was just launched this weekend, which is a great example of doing something quite different that allows them to have a brand presence and you know, almost take those vehicles out into the public as opposed to them coming to the showroom. But you know, that there are some real challenges, and I think it will be interesting, you know, 6-12 months down the line, how this is potentially still impacting that sector, that we may be yet to see.
Yeah, again, I'm hopeful. Actually, on car advertising, I used to think it was one of the best sectors, and I think you're right. They've fallen into a retail trap, haven't they?
But it could be an interesting sector, though, couldn't it, in terms of innovation, about how they're going to embrace some of those new technologies to be able to give those potential consumers the experiences they can't necessarily get going into a showroom. So I think that might be an area to watch for this year.
Well, I think Dacia as well is one of ours. I think they're one of the first to sell cars online effectively, which you wouldn't have. You know, I mean, it's quite a bold move to spend that amount of money on something that you perhaps don't know, but people are doing it. And I think that's the thing, that consumers are also innovate and, you know, adapting to that way of sort of interacting with them. So it will be super interesting to see how they do react.
Yeah. Okay, so this is obviously for our global TV conference. And just from a planning perspective, again, this may not be recession related, or it may have changed because of the situation we find ourselves in. But are you looking at TV, AV, video as a single channel? Because and how does that work with a more media owner led offering? So obviously Google, Facebook both have video offerings as part of their portfolio, but Sky obviously have video as a small part now, and you bring in all our targeting technologies. Who wants to talk about that? Those two sort of differing roles, whether you're coming at it from a creative format point of view or a media owner offering point of view.
Yeah, I think all the major holding groups now, they treat everything that you just talked about as one channel. We plan across AV, and there is, we're planning to maximize reach amongst sort of, whatever sort of target audiences that we're looking at any given point in time. I think going back to the automotive example, that's a really interesting one, where if you think that if you take even a sort of a car which sells in quite high volume, like a Honda Civic, it still only represents 1% of all sort of new cars sold in any given market. So finding a Civic buyer is like finding a sort of needle in a haystack. And I think what those A/B targeting opportunities afford us is the ability to try and hunt down people who sort of shop that type of car, and be far more efficient in our sort of AV delivery, be it across broadcast of VOD or sort of, or Facebook, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting is some of the fact that a lot of the media owners, the more traditional broadcast media owners, are really upping the ante in terms of the data overlays that you can now incorporate into your TV and certainly into your video planning. that mean I think there's really interesting opportunities for those journeys through the different kind of AV channels, if you like, and how you can start at quite a broadcast level and try and, you know, So's point, try and get that reach, but then the conversations and the sort of sequential planning that you can do after that, to then almost pass the baton on to performance, is really interesting. And it just feels like there's a lot of energy in that market and innovation happening that, you know, we're trying to keep up with and keep on top of and push as well from our side. But I think there could be some really interesting work coming out soon.
But again, I suppose if it's starting from an AV level, is there a danger? So again, some of the technology you talk about, whether it be Sky Ad Smart or Videology, which obviously got ITV in the UK, or Samsung Ads, which is now and those technologies, if the channel's being planned at an AV level, is there a danger that we're looking at a mass marketing use of video rather than that?
Yeah. I think that one of the debates we have is really interesting, is whether we need kind of generalists, so people that can plan AV, or whether we do need to think about kind of platform specialists that can kind of, because you could go, you know, Google all the way up from search to video, or you could go across and think about all those. And I think that's a debate that's really interesting, and I think that would directly challenge that model, because if you've got people that are thinking about the platform that someone's seeing it in and within, then that would you wouldn't be going at it that way. But then equally, there's an argument to go the other way. It's a really difficult one, and we're wrestling with.
Yeah, but again,
I'm just going to dance around. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I think when David was talking again, there's all the holding. And I know, yeah, the Dentsu lent into the Google tech stack, but that was the plan. AV, what are UM, what are IPG do? Are you going like Emma? Are you looking at both ways, the horizontal as well as the vertical, or are you still very much looking at that effective reach of video?
For us, it is the effective reach of video, and it's making sure that it's like building those capabilities and specialisms within the team. So you're kind of one team, and going back to that consumer journey piece. So we make sure that everybody is integrated together, so that when we are building a plan, we are thinking about those different touch points within that consumer journey, and we've got the right people leaning in. So I personally don't see that the fact that we've got ITV doing something over here and Sky doing something over here and Google doing something, I'd never see it as being disjointed, as long as you can connect it together through the consumer planning piece. And like Emma just said as well, is that I think we're probably in the next 12 months going to see a development in that area, particularly again, probably down to the way that COVID is, because the opportunities to be agile and that traditional TV doesn't allow you to be, albeit, you know, the flexibility that we've just seen might be something that is considered across much longer. But there's such rich data now. Consumers our clients and our brands are heavily invested in that data. Ourselves, we've heavily invested in data acquisition through Axiom. So it's really important that AV teams can actually utilize that, particularly for clients who now have first party data targets that they need to hit. So it's how we can actually make sure that you can connect all those different pieces, but via a consumer journey piece rather than really individuals, because again, that just becomes separated if you try and do it on a people level.
Okay, well, listen, I'm loving the fact that we're having a craft conversation about media planning, which I spend a lot of time, and I spend a lot of the end of my agency life talking about ad tech and tech stacks and things, whereas this has been the craft. So yeah, obviously you guys are planners with craft. I mean, does that mean you think like brand planning has started to win the land grab back from performance? Has the craft skill of media planning started to push back that ad tech, those ad tech behemoths, or not? Let's try and end on a positive there. And are you now also au fait with every piece of ad tech that you can get back to the craft skill of media planning, or
Oh,
in conjunction with?
Yeah, no.
I will never be au fait with every single piece of ad tech that's out there. And I think what's interesting is that obviously in 2021 we sort of pivot again with new sort of ICO regulations and further restrictions on what we can do with sort of IDs and permissible data sets and things like that. And those restrictions are going to they're going to force us to change again the way that we think about using sort of first party data. But to answer your question, yeah, I think the art of sort of media planning is sort of taking hold in agencies once again. And I'm sort of very thankful for that, because without it, I wouldn't have a job.
I asked you to enter the hire, and you mentioned the ICO, which was Vic, can I give you David's ICO, and can you raise, so again, why would media planning, especially in that traditional sense of brand planning and ideas, why will that help us get out of the current situation that we find ourselves in?
Because I think that is probably the crux of it, is understanding the consumers and behaviors, and then only then can you start to really build your brand and your ideas and your recommendations around that. And I think it's I think aligning with behaviors is fundamentally going to be important. And that BMW ad that I quoted earlier, that's a very good example of being extremely aware of and understanding your consumer and giving them the relevant comms and messages around that. So I think consumers will see it. They see brands for what they are, and I think emotion and empathy is more important than it's ever has been and ever will be. So it's really important that we really make sure that is the fundamental center and core of our planning.
Yeah, I liked your, again, the big planning debate is that effective frequency of video planning versus that vertical planning and the deep insights that you can get with media owners, and how you, that's the dichotomy for each planner. I mean, which one of those will help us get out of this situation better?
I mean, it has to be a blend of both. I think that's a skill of a media planner, that they can flip between those things and make sense of it in a way that brings it back to, what is that people need? What is it that we can try and understand to get people to do something differently, effectively. The data is great, but we need the people to do the thinking to reach the people rather than the computers. I'll end on that. I was always with my planners, don't be media neutral. No one wants to be Switzerland, do they? Yeah. All right, thank you all very much. That's been really enjoying run through of some of the dark times that we've had, and actually I am seeing glimpses of light as to how we'll actually have a more buoyant advertising economy coming out of this, rather than one that is perhaps bouncing along the bottom. So thank you all for your time, and I hope to see you on the other side very soon.